That's how Jake Reynolds begins his story, one that the world came to know through a single viral video clip, but the truth went much deeper than what people saw in 30 seconds of flames and chaos. It began on an ordinary Tuesday and ended with an extraordinary bond no one could have predicted. Jake Reynolds wasn't famous. He wasn't a hero. He was just a 34-year-old mechanic from a quiet town in Iowa, raising his 7-year-old son, Ben, after losing his wife, Ellie, to cancer 2 years earlier. He worked hard, kept his head down, and poured every ounce of love into being both mom and dad to his boy. Mornings started with messy peanut butter sandwiches, mismatched socks, and rushed goodbyes at the school gate. Evenings were for bedtime stories, Lego cities on the living room carpet, and whispered prayers. Jake had learned to live with the ache of loss, but he'd never grown used to the silence at night. That silence often reminded him of everything he once had. And what he could never bring back. But on one fateful afternoon, that silence would be shattered by screams, smoke, and something he never expected to find. Jake was picking Ben up from a playdate across town. The sun had just dipped low enough to cast golden rays over the roofs. They were driving home when Ben noticed the smoke first. "Dad, look." Jake followed his son's pointed finger to a 2-story house at the end of Maple Street. Thick, dark smoke billowed from the windows. The neighbors were gathering outside, some shouting, others calling 911. Without thinking, Jake slammed the brakes, leapt out of the truck, and sprinted toward the chaos. "Is everyone out?" he yelled. A woman sobbed, clutching a toddler. "My niece. She's still inside, the upstairs bedroom. We couldn't get to her." Time froze. Jake didn't pause. Didn't question. He just ran. The front door was already cracked open, fire licking the edges. The heat hit him like a wall, searing and suffocating, but he pushed forward, covering his mouth with his sleeve, navigating through the smoke. Up the stairs. Creaking floor. Flames dancing on the wallpaper. He heard a whimper behind a closed door. "Hold on, sweetheart. I'm coming." He kicked the door open. There she was, curled in a ball by the bed, coughing, crying. Jake scooped her up in his arms, shielding her with his jacket. The way out was already cut off by fire. There was no time to go back down. He scanned the room, saw the window. With one breath and one prayer, he kicked the screen out and shouted below. "Catch her. I'm dropping her down." 2 men positioned themselves. Jake lowered the girl as far as he could, then let go. They caught her. The next second, flames tore through the floorboards behind him. He had seconds to escape. Jake backed up, took a running start, and jumped. The video went viral within hours. A bystander had filmed everything. Jake carrying the girl, the leap through smoke, landing hard on the grass and collapsing. It was shared by news channels, influencers, even the governor. But what the world didn't see was what came after. Jake spent 3 nights in the hospital for smoke inhalation and minor burns. The little girl, her name was Maya, was safe. Her family visited Jake with tears and gratitude, but it wasn't until Jake was discharged that something unexpected happened. Social workers showed up at his door. Maya's aunt and uncle, the ones she'd been staying with, couldn't take care of her anymore. Maya's mother, who had struggled with addiction for years, had disappeared again. The authorities had no one else. "She keeps asking for you," the woman said. "She says you're her hero." Jake blinked. "I just did what anyone would have done." She shook her head gently. "No, Mr. Reynolds. You did what no one else could." And just like that, the question was laid bare, would he take her in, even temporarily? Jake hesitated. He had his hands full. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't even sure he was enough for Ben some days. But that night, when he saw Maya curled up asleep on the hospital bed, clutching a worn-out stuffed animal, something inside him shifted. She didn't need a hero. She needed a home. What followed wasn't a perfect fairy tale. The early weeks were hard. Maya was scared. She cried at night. She flinched at loud noises. She clung to Ben and refused to sleep unless someone stayed in the room. Jake had to rework his schedule, take unpaid leave, navigate school registrations, therapy sessions, and court hearings. There were moments when he stood in the kitchen at 2 a.m., head in his hands, wondering if he'd made a huge mistake. But every time Maya smiled, it was like watching the sunrise after a long, bitter winter. Ben, wise beyond his years, stepped in like a true big brother. They played, built pillow forts, and had ice cream picnics in the backyard. Maya began to laugh again. Months passed. And then, the final court date came. Jake stood before the judge, hands slightly trembling. He didn't know what the decision would be, but he'd already made up his mind. "If I'm allowed," he said, voice steady, "I want her to stay. Not because I saved her, but because she saved me too." The judge nodded. And just like that, Maya Reynolds became official. Now, years later, Jake tells his story not to boast, but to remind others of something deeply important. We all carry pain. We all lose. But sometimes, in the middle of fire and fear, we find our second chance, not in the way we imagined, but in the people who walk into our lives exactly when we least expect them. He's still just a mechanic. Still packs peanut butter sandwiches and forgets to match socks. But now, the Reynolds home is filled with laughter, chaos, and the sound of three voices, Ben's, Maya's, and his own, blending together at bedtime. Their story became a book, then a foundation helping foster kids. But none of it would have happened if Jake hadn't stopped his truck. If he hadn't gone back. Sometimes, the smallest choice becomes the most incredible story.